7 young men, one management empire, and the one variable neither side can fully control, a woman. BTS didn't become the most documented music act in modern history by accident. Every move, every public appearance, every friendship is watched, analyzed, and dissected by millions of fans across every time zone on Earth. Hybe, the company behind them, built an industry around managing that attention with surgical precision. But personal lives don't follow contracts. Beyond the sold-out stadiums and Grammy nominations, these 7 men are navigating something far more universally human: relationships, privacy, and what happens when those two things collide with global fame. And when they do, the tension that follows isn't just tabloid noise. It touches fan loyalty, brand partnerships, military timelines, and the very architecture of a career worth billions. So here's the real question. If a woman were to enter the picture in a way that sparked genuine public controversy, what would actually happen? And which member would face the most complicated fallout? We're going through all 7, one by one. Some answers might surprise you. One of them almost certainly will.
Number 7. Jimin, the woman who changes the situation. To understand why Jimin sits at number 7 on this list, you first need to understand the specific kind of pressure he operates under. And it is a pressure that is different from the other 6 members in one very distinct way. Park Jimin was born on October 13, 1995, in Busan, South Korea. He trained under Big Hit Entertainment, now Hybe, for roughly 2 years before debuting with BTS in June 2013. In the years that followed, he became one of the group's most visible faces globally, consistently ranking at or near the top of brand reputation indexes in South Korea and routinely breaking records on platforms like Spotify and YouTube as a solo artist. His 2023 debut solo album, Face, made him the first South Korean solo artist to debut at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 with the single Like Crazy. That is not a small footnote. That is a commercial landmark. But here is the layer that matters most for this conversation. Jimin has built his public identity around emotional transparency, in one sense, through his music, his performances, his tearful moments on camera, while simultaneously maintaining almost complete silence about his romantic life. That is a deliberate construction, and it has held for well over a decade. The result is a fan base that feels deeply connected to him emotionally, yet knows almost nothing concrete about who he is behind closed doors. That combination creates a specific kind of tension that does not exist to the same degree with every other member. When someone builds that kind of wall for that long, any crack in it becomes enormous news. Now, consider the actual mechanics of what would happen if a credible rumor, not idle speculation, but a well-sourced report from a credible South Korean outlet, were to link Jimin to a woman in a romantic context. South Korea's entertainment journalism moves fast. Sites like Dispatch, which broke the relationships of several high-profile Korean celebrities over the years, have a track record of releasing what they describe as thoroughly documented reports, complete with photographs and timelines. In the Korean pop industry, a Dispatch report is treated as not gossip, it is treated as a signal. The immediate reaction within Hybe's communications infrastructure would be significant. Hybe is a publicly traded company, listed on the Korea Exchange since 2021, and its stock price has historically responded to news involving BTS members. That is not speculation, it is documented market behavior. When news of BTS members' military enlistments was announced, analysts tracked the stock movement. When the group announced a temporary focus on solo careers in 2022, Hybe shares dropped measurably. a major personal revelation involving one of the group's most commercially valuable members would land in that same category of market-sensitive information. But the reaction from Jimin's specific fanbase, known as Jimin stans, and a substantial portion of the broader ARMY community would be the more complex variable. When someone builds that kind of wall for that long, a portion of the K-pop fanbase culture has historically treated the romantic availability of idols as part of the parasocial relationship they maintain with them. This is not unique to BTS. It's a structural feature of the industry that Hybe itself was built within, and has, at different points, both benefited from and attempted to reshape. Jimin himself has navigated this with a kind of careful awareness. In interviews, he has spoken about how much the support of fans means to him, while almost never touching the subject of personal relationships. That restraint is intentional. It is also the reason why any departure from it, voluntary or forced by outside reporting, would land so loudly. From Hybe's perspective, the calculus is straightforward but uncomfortable. If the company is seen to be dismissive or controlling, they risk backlash from fans who support the members' right to personal lives. If they issue a vague, non-committal statement that neither confirms nor denies, they leave the narrative open for weeks of speculation. And if the member in question decides to confirm something publicly on their terms, which has become increasingly common among fourth-generation idols in Korea, then Hybe has to adapt its communication strategy in real time, which is rarely clean. There's also the military dimension, which applies to every male BTS member, but carries particular weight here. Jimin enlisted in the South Korean military in December 2023, with a scheduled discharge in June 2025. During that period, his public exposure was significantly reduced. A rumor emerging during or immediately after military service would hit a specific nerve, a time when fans are already emotionally heightened about a member's return. The timing of a revelation in this industry matters almost as much as the revelation itself. What makes Jimin's position at number 7 rather than higher on this list is the nature of his communication style. He's emotionally articulate. He has demonstrated repeatedly the ability to address difficult topics in ways that feel genuine and considered. If anyone in this group had the interpersonal tools to navigate a sudden romantic rumor without it spiraling into a prolonged public crisis, Jimin's track record suggests he's better equipped than many give him credit for. The situation would be turbulent, but turbulent is not necessarily unmanageable. The real complication would come not from Jimin himself. It would come from the gap between public expectation and private reality, a gap that has been carefully maintained for years, and which, once disrupted, cannot simply be restored. That's what makes this scenario genuinely interesting, rather than merely dramatic. And speaking of gaps between image and reality, the next member on this list attracts more raw public scrutiny than almost anyone in the group, which means when something surfaces about him, the noise level is in a completely different league.
Number 6. Jungkook, a sensational rumor. There is a specific kind of fame that belongs to Jungkook, and it operates differently from the fame that surrounds the other 6 members. It is louder, faster, and considerably harder to contain. Jungkook was born on September 1, 1997 in Busan, South Korea, making him the youngest member of BTS, a distinction that has shaped his public identity from the very beginning. He auditioned for Big Hit Entertainment at the age of 14, reportedly turning down offers from other agencies to sign with what was then a relatively small company. He debuted with BTS in 2013 at 15 years old and spent the next decade growing up, in the most literal sense, in front of one of the largest and most attentive fan bases on the planet. That context is important. Jungkook did not enter public life as a finished product. He entered it as a teenager, and the audience that watched him grow has a deeply personal stake in who he has become. That kind of long-term parasocial investment does not dissolve easily, and it shapes the way any news about his personal life lands, not just among casual listeners, but among the core fan base that has tracked him for over a decade. By any commercial measure, Jungkook is one of the most successful solo artists to emerge from the K-pop industry. His 2023 single, 7, featuring rapper Lotto, debuted at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, a chart placement that reflects genuine crossover appeal, not just fan-base streaming coordination. His debut album, Golden, released in November 2023, solidified his standing as a globally competitive solo act independent of the BTS umbrella. These are not minor achievements. They represent a level of market penetration that very few non-English language artists have reached. And yet, for all of that commercial success, it is Jungkook's personal life that consistently generates the most volatile coverage. This is not without precedent. In 2022, South Korean media reported that Jungkook had been seen at a tattoo parlor run by a woman identified in Korean press as a tattoo artist, and speculation about the nature of their relationship spread rapidly across platforms. The reports were never officially confirmed as a romantic relationship by either Jungkook or Hybe, but the speed and scale of the coverage illustrated something important. When it comes to Jungkook specifically, even unconfirmed proximity to a woman in any non-professional context becomes global news within hours. This is partly a function of his position as the maknae, the youngest member, a role that carries specific cultural weight in South Korea. Fans who have watched him since his teenage years feel a protective instinct that can quickly shift into intense scrutiny of anyone who enters his orbit. It is also partly a function of sheer volume. Jungkook has more individual followers across social platforms than any other BTS member, and that reach means any story connected to him reaches an audience that dwarfs what a rumor about most other artists would touch. From Hybe's operational standpoint, a credible and well-documented report linking Jungkook to a woman in a romantic context would require immediate strategic response, not because the relationship itself is a problem in any legal or contractual sense, but because the secondary effects move quickly. Fan communities splinter, social media timelines flood with competing narratives, international media picks up the story within a news cycle, and if the report originates from a source like Dispatch, which has a documented history of releasing verified photo evidence alongside its celebrity relationship reports, then issuing a flat denial is not a viable option. Hybe's communications team has navigated this territory before. The company has developed a general approach of issuing carefully worded statements that neither confirm nor deny specific details, while affirming respect for the member's privacy. That approach has variable effectiveness. It tends to slow the news cycle, but it rarely stops it. What makes Jungkook's scenario particularly layered is his own relationship with transparency. Unlike some of his bandmates who maintain a strict wall between their public and private selves, Jungkook has, at various points, been remarkably candid in live streams and in interviews, speaking openly about his emotions, his struggles with pressure, and his desire to be understood as a full person rather than a curated image. That openness creates a paradox. The audience feels they know him well, which makes any revelation about an aspect of his life he has chosen not to share feel like a more significant breach of the established dynamic. His military service, which began in December 2023 alongside Jimin, adds another dimension. The period immediately surrounding a BTS member's enlistment and discharge is one of heightened fan attention and emotional investment. A rumor surfacing in that window, particularly accompanied by documented evidence, would not just be processed as celebrity gossip, it would be processed as a significant personal revelation during a period when the fan base is already primed for every piece of news about him. The bottom line is this: Jungkook's position at number 6 is not because the potential impact is small. It is because, despite the scale of public attention around him, he has demonstrated a capacity to acknowledge difficult moments honestly, and Hybe has enough experience managing his specific media footprint to have a functional response ready. The situation would be loud, it would trend globally, but loud doesn't always mean uncontrollable. What separates the members higher on this list is a different kind of complexity, not just the volume of attention, but the specific nature of what is at stake for each of them personally, professionally, and publicly. And the next member presents a scenario that is quieter on the surface, but considerably more complicated underneath.
Number 5. Suga, a questionable secret. Of all 7 BTS members, Suga is the one most likely to make the public realize something they had not fully considered before. Silence in this industry is not neutrality. Silence is a choice, and when that choice gets disrupted, the reaction tends to be proportionately intense. Min Yoon-gi, known professionally as Suga and under the solo alias Agusti, was born on March 9, 1993 in Daegu, South Korea. He is the third oldest member of BTS, and by most accounts, the most deliberately private one. That privacy is not accidental. It is a posture he has maintained across years of interviews, fan interactions, and public appearances with a consistency that few in his industry have matched. And yet, the music tells a different story. Suga's solo output under the Agusti name is arguably the most autobiographically raw body of work produced by any BTS member. His 2016 self-titled mixtape, released for free on SoundCloud, included direct references to his experiences with depression, obsessive-compulsive tendencies, and the social anxiety he managed during his early years in Seoul. His 2022 mixtape, D2, expanded on those games with clinical precision, and his 2023 studio album, D-Day, which debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200, confronted South Korean societal pressures, psychological fragmentation, and the cost of ambition with a directness that critics and listeners recognized as genuinely unusual for the genre. The paradox at the center of Suga's public identity is this: he is intensely private about his life, yet intensely transparent about his inner world. He will not tell you who he sees on a Friday evening, but he will, in meticulous lyrical detail, tell you what it felt like to sleep on a floor in a practice room at 17 and wonder if he had made a catastrophic mistake. That paradox is precisely why a rumor involving a woman would land differently for Suga than for any other member. His fan base has developed its understanding of him almost entirely through his art. They know the texture of his anxieties. They have read his acknowledgement of the pressure to appear stable when he is not. They have heard him describe, in his own words, the isolation that can accompany a level of fame that removes you from ordinary social life. When someone has shared that depth of internal experience through their work, the discovery of something significant in their private life, something they actively chose not to share, does not feel like gossip. It feels like a revelation about a person the audience thought they understood. The 2023 controversy surrounding his DUI citation is relevant context here. In August of that year, South Korean police confirmed that Suga had been cited for driving an electric scooter while under the influence of alcohol in Yongsan, Seoul, Europe. The blood alcohol level was reported as 0.227%, well above South Korea's legal limit of 0.08%. It was a genuine controversy, not a fabricated one, and Hybe issued a statement acknowledging it. Suga himself issued a public apology. What followed was a measured but real public reckoning, fan disappointment, media coverage, and a period of reassessment. That episode is instructive. It showed that Suga's typically controlled image is not indestructible, and that when it cracks, the coverage is both rapid and global. It also showed something else. He handled it with directness. There was no extended denial, no prolonged silence, no attempt to redirect. He acknowledged what happened and expressed regret. That response pattern matters when you consider how a romantic rumor would likely unfold. A report linking Suga to a woman, particularly one with documented evidence, would trigger the same global media cycle as it would for any other member, but the specific texture of the reaction would be different. Because so little is known about his personal life in that domain, the audience has no existing framework to process the information within. There are no prior relationship history that would provide context. There are no throwaway comments in old interviews that fans could retroactively interpret as hints. The revelation would arrive into a vacuum, and audiences and media tend to fill vacuums aggressively. From Hybe's position, a Suga-related rumor presents a specific communications challenge. He enlisted in the South Korean military in September 2023, not in an active-duty combat role. His service designation was as a social service worker, a classification available to individuals with certain physical conditions, in his case, a shoulder injury requiring surgery in 2020. This distinction matters because it generated some public debate in South Korea at the time. A romantic rumor surfacing against that backdrop during or around military service would collide with an already complex public narrative, rather than landing in clean air. There is also the question of how Suga himself would respond. Unlike members who tend toward emotional public statements, his communication style is measured and often blunt. He has described himself in interviews as someone who does not enjoy social performance. He is not the member who would deliver a tearful explanation in a way designed to manage fan sentiment. What he would offer is likely more direct, which could be either stabilizing or, depending on the specifics, more incendiary than a softer response. The reason he sits at number 5 rather than higher is ultimately about scale of public volatility. His fan base, while deeply devoted, skews towards listeners who have engaged with the more introspective side of his work. They are, on average, somewhat more complex than pure idol fandom. That does not mean the reaction would be mild. It means it would be somewhat more measured than what a few of the members above him would face. But measured reactions are still reactions, and in the context of a company like Hybe, even a measured controversy is one that requires deliberate management. The next member on this list, however, presents a scenario where management becomes far more complicated because the person involved processes everything in public and in considerable depth.
Number 4. RM. A surprising choice. Every group has a center of gravity. For BTS, that center, at least in terms of public communication, intellectual representation, and long-term strategic thinking, has always been RM, which is exactly why a personal rumor involving him would not just be a celebrity story, it would be an institutional moment. Kim Namjoon, known professionally as RM, was born on September 12, 1994, in Ilsan, a district of Goyang in Gyeonggi Province, South Korea. He became the leader of BTS from its inception in 2013, a role that was not symbolic but functional. He was, from the beginning, the group's primary English-language communicator, a skill he developed largely through self-directed study, including watching the American sitcom Friends, until he reached conversational fluency. That detail is not trivial. It speaks to a specific kind of discipline that has defined how he approaches almost everything. By the time BTS stood at the United Nations General Assembly in September 2018 to deliver a speech as part of UNICEF's Generation Unlimited campaign, RM was the one who spoke. The address, watched by millions online within hours of its delivery, covered themes of identity, self-acceptance, and the importance of finding one's own voice. It was not a scripted corporate statement. It was considered, personal, and in places genuinely moving. It reached audiences far outside the typical K-pop demographic and was cited by international media as a demonstration of the group's broader cultural significance. That speech matters for this conversation because it illustrates something fundamental about RM's public role. He is not merely a musician with a management company. He is, in the public imagination, the articulate conscience of BTS, the one who contextualizes, who explains, who represents the group in spaces where pure celebrity is not enough. When that kind of figure becomes the subject of a personal rumor, the cognitive dissonance for the audience is considerably sharper than it would be for a member who operates primarily in the space of entertainment. His solo work reinforces this reading. His 2022 studio album, Indigo, which debuted at number 3 on the Billboard 200, was a genuine artistic statement rather than a commercial exercise. It featured collaborations with artists including Erykah Badu, Anderson .Paak, and Mahalia, and engaged with themes of loss, transition, and the search for identity with a seriousness that the music press acknowledged. His earlier solo projects, the 2015 mixtape RM and the 2018 playlist Mono, established a pattern of using personal reflection as the primary creative material. He has consistently made his inner life the subject of his art, in ways that are thoughtful rather than confessional. His widely documented passion for contemporary art is another relevant dimension. RM has visited major art institutions across multiple countries, including the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Seoul, the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, and the Art Institute of Chicago. He collects contemporary Korean art and has spoken in interviews about specific works and artists with genuine knowledge. This is not celebrity tourism or image management. It is documented, consistent personal interest that he has cultivated over years, largely outside of public programming. The accumulation of all of this creates a specific public image, a man who thinks carefully, acts deliberately, and takes the responsibility that comes with influence. Which is why, if a credible rumor involving a woman were to emerge for RM, the question the public would ask first would not be the usual tabloid questions. It would be, how did he handle it? What did he say? And did what he said align with the values he has publicly articulated? That standard, the expectation of consistency between stated values and private behavior, is one that most celebrities are never held to, simply because they have never established a public persona built on intellectual and ethical seriousness. RM has, and that makes any gap between image and reality significantly more newsworthy. From Hybe's perspective, RM's scenario is one of the more strategically sensitive ones on this list, not because of fan volatility, but because of what a poorly managed response could do to the broader perception of the group's integrity. BTS has been positioned, particularly in Western markets, as something more than a pop act. Their anti-bullying campaigns, their UNICEF partnership, their addresses to the UN, these are all elements of a brand identity that extends beyond music. RM is the primary human face of that identity. A rumor that is handled badly or that contradicts aspects of his public persona does not just damage his individual reputation, it potentially complicates the credibility of every association Hybe has built around the group's social messaging. His military service, which began in December 2023, provides a specific timing context. RM enlisted in the Army, serving in a position that included public duties and representation. His service as a social worker was in a unit tied to public welfare engagement. A rumor surfacing during or adjacent to that period would be complicated further by questions about conduct and propriety in that context. What saves RM from sitting higher on this list is, paradoxically, the same quality that makes his scenario so interesting in the first place. He thinks before he speaks, and he chooses his words deliberately. In the event of a rumor, the public statement he produced, if and when he chose to make one, would almost certainly be considered, honest, and calibrated to minimize escalation. That does not eliminate the damage, but it controls the trajectory of it. The members above him on this list face a different kind of challenge entirely, one where the rumor itself is not the most complicated part. What happens around it is. And the next member is someone whose relationship with public attention is so intense, so constant, and so fundamentally built into his identity that a single photograph could rewrite the entire narrative without a single word being spoken.
Number 3, Taehyung. A mysterious figure appears. There is something specific about the way Kim Taehyung occupies public space that sets him apart from virtually every other figure in contemporary popular music. It is not just his reach, though that is considerable. It is the nature of the attention itself, its quality, its intensity, and the almost reflexive way that anything connected to him becomes a global conversation before the day is out. Kim Taehyung, known professionally as V, was born on December 30th, 1995, in Daegu, South Korea. He was the last member to be revealed before BTS's debut in 2013, a fact that became something of a legend within the fandom, his existence kept deliberately hidden until the group was about to launch. Whether that was strategic or incidental, it established a template that would define his relationship with public attention for the next decade, the sense that with Taehyung, there is always something just out of frame, something not quite fully visible, which draws the eye in ways that more straightforward presentations do not. His commercial and cultural footprint is significant and specific. His solo debut album Layover, released in September 2023, debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200 and demonstrated a musical identity that leaned toward jazz-influenced R&B rather than the high-energy pop production associated with the group's biggest hits. His earlier single, Christmas Tree, released as the OST for the South Korean drama Our Beloved Summer in late 2021, became one of the most streamed Korean OST tracks internationally that year. His work as a global brand ambassador for Celine, the French luxury fashion house, placed him in a category of cultural crossover that very few K-pop artists have accessed. He also has one of the most followed Instagram accounts of any Korean celebrity, with a following that spans every major global market. When he posts, the engagement is not just large, it is immediate. Images go viral within minutes. That speed is relevant because it shapes the environment in which any rumor about him would propagate. In early 2023, that environment was put to a direct test. South Korean media outlet Dispatch, the same outlet responsible for breaking several high-profile Korean celebrity relationships over the years, published a report that included photographs suggesting a romantic relationship between V and Jennie Kim, a member of the globally recognized K-pop group Blackpink. The photographs showed the two in what appeared to be private settings. Neither Hybe nor YG Entertainment, Jennie's management agency at the time, issued an official confirmation or denial. The story nonetheless spread to every major entertainment media outlet globally within hours and became one of the most discussed celebrity stories in the Korean entertainment industry that year. The mechanics of that episode are instructive. The reaction was not limited to K-pop fandoms. International outlets, including major newspapers and entertainment sites in the United States, United Kingdom, and across Southeast Asia, picked up the story. The intersection of two of the most commercially significant acts in Korean music, BTS and Blackpink, amplified the coverage in ways that neither story would have generated independently. And, because neither agency confirmed anything, the narrative space remained open for weeks of speculation, interpretation, and counter-narrative from competing fan communities. That particular dynamic, the intersection of massive fan bases, corporate silence, and a media ecosystem hungry for content, is precisely what makes Taehyung's position at number 3 on this list so clearly warranted. For Hybe, the challenge with Taehyung is not managing a rumor. It is managing an ecosystem. The audience for any Taehyung-related story is not a single community with a single emotional register. It includes dedicated BTS fans, Celine followers who found him through fashion media, casual listeners who know him from specific viral moments, and international entertainment consumers who have no particular investment in K-pop but recognize him as a cultural figure. Each of those audiences processes the same information differently. A statement calibrated for one might backfire with another. That is a communications problem of genuine complexity. There is also the question of Taehyung's own relationship with visibility. Unlike members who minimize their public footprint and prefer to work through the music alone, Taehyung has demonstrated a consistent appetite for public presence, his Instagram activity, his appearances at fashion weeks, his evident enjoyment of public-facing creative expression. That openness is part of his appeal. But it also means the boundary between what is shared and what is private is less clearly defined, which makes any intrusion across that boundary feel simultaneously less surprising and more significant. His military service, which began in December 2023 alongside Jimin, adds the same timing sensitivity applicable to other members, the heightened emotional state of fan bases during enlistment and the period around discharge, when every piece of information is processed with amplified attention. But for Taehyung specifically, that sensitivity is multiplied by the sheer scale of his global following and the speed of his media ecosystem. What places him at 3 rather than at the top of this list is a matter of degree rather than category. The situations above him involve variables that go beyond the immediate noise of public reaction. They touch on factors that are structural, reputational, and in one case, genuinely unprecedented in how they would reshape public perception. Those 2 members carry scenarios where the stakes are not just high for them personally, but potentially significant for the architecture of what BTS represents as a whole. And the next one on this list is a member whose position at number 2 might initially seem counterintuitive until you understand what is actually at stake. Number 2, Jimin. A decision that causes a stir. Jimin at number 2 might seem like a placement that requires explanation. He is not the member the tabloids chase most aggressively. He is not the one whose every public appearance triggers immediate speculation. And yet, when you examine the specific circumstances of where he is right now, professionally, personally, and in relation to Hybe, the picture that emerges is one of the most genuinely interesting on this entire list. Because with Jimin, the scenario is not about a rumor catching him off guard. It is about what happens when the most structurally free member of BTS makes a deliberate choice. Kim Seokjin was born on December 4, 1992, in Gwacheon, Gyeonggi Province, South Korea. He is the oldest member of BTS, a distinction that, in Korean social culture, carries specific weight in terms of seniority, responsibility, and the quiet authority that comes with age within a group dynamic. He was not a trainee who entered the industry through years of pre-debut preparation. He was studying acting at Konkuk University in Seoul when a talent scout from Big Hit Entertainment approached him near a bus stop. He joined the company and eventually debuted with BTS in 2013, pivoting from an acting path to one that would take him considerably further than either he or his agency could have predicted at the time. His public persona is one of the most deliberately constructed in the group, and constructed, in this case, is not a criticism. It is an observation about craft. Jimin built an image around humor, self-confidence, and an almost theatrical enjoyment of his own attractiveness. The worldwide handsome persona he has leaned into across variety shows, fan interactions, and media appearances is not accidental. It is a consistent character that he has maintained across years with genuine comedic timing and self-awareness. Behind it, he is considered by bandmates and collaborators to be one of the more grounded and emotionally stable members of the group. His solo output has been relatively sparse compared to some members, but has landed with precision. His 2022 single, The Astronaut, was co-written with members of Coldplay and performed live at a Coldplay concert in Buenos Aires, Argentina, in front of a sold-out stadium crowd. The performance was broadcast live and watched by millions internationally. It was a remarkable moment, a Korean pop artist debuting an original song in front of a Western rock audience, with full stadium participation in South America. The scope of that crossover illustrated something important about where Jimin sits in the broader cultural landscape. Then came December 2022, Jimin became the first BTS member to enlist in mandatory South Korean military service, a move that had been anticipated but was still significant as the first domino in what would be a staggered 2-year process of the group's members entering service. He served as an active duty soldier in the 5th Infantry Division of the Republic of Korea Army. On June 12, 2024, He was discharged, becoming the first BTS member to complete his mandatory military service and return to civilian life. That discharge is the most important fact in this entire section. Jin re-entered public life with a status that none of the other members currently share. He has fulfilled his national service obligation. The constraints, real and perceived, that come with active military service no longer apply to him. In the months following his discharge, he appeared as a torchbearer in the Paris 2024 Olympic Games torch relay, a highly public, internationally visible role. He participated in variety programming. He began re-engaging with the entertainment infrastructure that had been on hold for nearly 2 years. And here is where the scenario becomes genuinely distinctive. Every other member on this list faces the possibility of a rumor surfacing, something external, something they have to respond to. Jin's number 2 position is built on a different premise entirely. He is the member most structurally positioned to make a proactive, personal decision about his romantic life on his own terms. He has completed his service. He is the oldest member of the group. His public persona is built on confidence and deliberate self-presentation. If Jin decided, not because a rumor forced his hand, but because he chose to publicly acknowledge a relationship, the decision itself would be the story. That distinction matters enormously. A rumor is something that happens to you and requires a defensive response. A decision is something you own. And a deliberate, public acknowledgement of a relationship from Jin, made with the characteristic confidence of someone who has spent over a decade building a self-assured public image, would land not as a scandal to be managed, but as a statement to be reckoned with. Hybe's challenge in that scenario is fundamentally different from managing a leaked photograph or a dispatch report. It would involve responding to an autonomous decision made by their oldest, newly discharged, fully available artist, one who has already demonstrated, through his post-discharge public engagements, that he is re-establishing his presence on his own timeline. The company could not issue a preemptive statement. There would be nothing to get ahead of. By the time Hybe's communications team was formulating a response, Jin's decision would already be out in the world. The fan reaction to that scenario would be complex in ways that are specific to his position. As the oldest member, Jin occupies a kind of elder sibling role within the group's narrative. His choices carry a particular kind of cultural signal within the fan base. If he normalizes something, it changes the baseline for how similar situations involving other members are perceived. A Jin relationship announcement, handled with the humor and directness his public persona is built on, could actually shift the conversation in a way that no other member's announcement would. The reason he sits at number 2 rather than number 1 is not because his scenario is less interesting. It is because the member above him presents circumstances that are structurally unprecedented in ways that go beyond anything on this list. And that member's story involves a variable that none of the others carry in quite the same way, one that could, depending on how it plays out, become the most consequential moment in the group's post-hiatus history. Number 1, J-Hope. The most shocking scenario. Every list has a number 1, and the reasoning for this placement needs to be precise, because putting J-Hope at the top is not about predicting that something will happen, or suggesting that he is more likely than the others to be involved in controversy. It is about understanding what happens to a specific kind of public identity when it encounters disruption. And J-Hope's public identity is, arguably, the most carefully and thoroughly constructed of any BTS member, which is exactly what makes his scenario the most consequential of all 7. Young Hoseok, known professionally as J-Hope, was born on February 18, 1994, in Gwangju, South Korea. Before joining Big Hit Entertainment, he was a competitive street dancer with a background in popping and locking, a skill set that became foundational to BTS's performance identity in its early years. Within the group, he functions not just as a dancer and rapper, but as a specific kind of emotional infrastructure. The label Sunshine of BTS is one that has followed him for over a decade, not as an external imposition from fans, but as a persona that he actively maintains, articulates, and has built his entire solo brand around. That is the first thing to understand. J-Hope's positivity is not incidental. It is intentional. His commercial achievements are substantial and carry a historic dimension that distinguishes him from the rest of the group in the Western market context. In July 2022, J-Hope headlined Lollapalooza in Chicago, becoming the first Korean solo artist to headline a major American music festival. This was not a supporting slot or a special guest appearance. It was a headline position at one of the country's most prominent annual music events, in front of a crowd of approximately 90,000 people, the vast majority of whom had no direct K-pop affiliation. That performance was documented extensively in Western entertainment media and represented a genuine threshold crossing, the point at which J-Hope's solo presence was acknowledged not just by the K-pop ecosystem, but by the mainstream American music industry. His studio album Jack in the Box, released in July 2022, debuted at number 17 on the Billboard 200, a reflection of genuine market penetration. The album was darker in tone than his previous work, a deliberate artistic pivot that he discussed openly in interviews as an attempt to show a dimension of himself beyond the perpetual brightness of his established persona. Critics noted the contrast. Audiences processed it as an expansion rather than a contradiction. But that attempt to introduce complexity into his image is itself instructive. It suggests that J-Hope is aware of the tension between who he presents publicly and the fuller human experience underneath. In April 2023, J-Hope became the first BTS member to enlist in mandatory South Korean military service, doing so voluntarily and ahead of his required deadline. That decision was widely interpreted as principled, a deliberate choice to fulfill a national obligation without delay, at a moment when he was at a commercial peak and the timing was personally costly. South Korean media covered the enlistment extensively. Fans gathered in significant numbers. The voluntary early enlistment added a layer to the public narrative around him. Here was someone who, at the height of solo success, chose duty over convenience. He served in the 36th Infantry Division and was discharged in October 2024. Post-discharge, J-Hope re-entered public life carrying all of that accumulated narrative weight: the Lollapalooza landmark, the critically noted solo album, the principled early enlistment, the decade-long identity as the group's emotional cornerstone. He returned to an entertainment landscape that had changed during his service, but where his established reputation was intact and, if anything, reinforced by the choices he had made before and during his military period. Now place a credible romantic rumor, or, more significantly, a public controversy involving a woman, into that specific context. The collision is unlike any other on this list because of what J-Hope's public identity actually rests on. Jimin's identity rests on emotional depth and artistry. RM's rests on intellectual integrity. Taehyung's rests on aesthetic mystique. Jin's rests on confident self-awareness. But J-Hope's rests on something more fundamental and more fragile: the idea that he is genuinely, consistently, unconditionally positive. That he is, to the people who follow him, a reliable source of warmth in a media landscape that is otherwise saturated with conflict and negativity. That is an extraordinarily high standard to maintain. And it is also, when disrupted, the most jarring of all possible gaps between expectation and reality. A controversy involving J-Hope would not just be processed as celebrity news. It would be processed as a kind of cognitive rupture, the moment where the figure most associated with uncomplicated positivity becomes complicated. The reaction would not be loud in the way a Jungkook story is loud. It would be quiet in a way that is considerably harder to manage, the slow recalibration of an audience that had, perhaps without fully realizing it, built something emotionally significant around the belief that he was exactly who he appeared to be. For Hybe, this is the scenario with the most unpredictable secondary effects. Not because the controversy itself would necessarily be more severe than what some other members might face, but because the established identity being disrupted is the one that most directly serves the group's emotional function within its fanbase. J-Hope is, in a documented and functional sense, the morale of BTS. Any sustained damage to that image damages something the group relies on beyond individual commercial value. The higher you build something, the more precisely everyone notices the moment it shifts. And that is why J-Hope, of all 7 members, occupies the number 1 position, not because his scenario is the most dramatic, but because it is the most structurally significant. Which brings us to the question that has been underneath this entire conversation from the very beginning. 7 members. 7 distinct public identities. And 7 genuinely different answers to the same underlying question. What happens when the most human part of a person's life collides with one of the most commercially managed careers in modern music history? What this conversation makes clear is that the scenario is never really about the woman. It is about the gap between image and reality, between what is maintained publicly and what exists privately, between the version of a person that millions of people have built a genuine emotional investment in and the full, complicated human being underneath it. Some of those gaps are narrow. Some of them are wide enough that a single photograph could change everything. Hybe is a company that has spent years building infrastructure around managing exactly this kind of tension. The members themselves have spent years developing the instincts to navigate it. And yet, the one variable that neither contracts nor communication strategy can fully anticipate is a person, their timing, their visibility, the specific way they enter the story. The most important distinction to hold on to, after all of this, is the one between fact, rumor, and speculation. This was a narrative exploration, not a claim, not a report, and not a prediction. So here is the question worth sitting with. Which of these 7 men do you think would face the most genuinely difficult situation, and why? Leave your answer in the comments. And if this kind of in-depth look at the people behind the music is something you want more of, subscribing is how you make sure you don't miss the next one.